He believed the hardest words a man could speak were the ones that won every argument, but he was about to discover that a single sentence could destroy everything he had ever built. "You mean nothing to me." Ethan Romano's voice was calm, almost indifferent, as if he were dismissing a routine business meeting instead of the woman who had quietly stood beside him for the last 3 years. The rain tapped softly against the towering windows of the Romano estate, turning the Chicago skyline into a blur of silver lights beyond the glass. Claire Bennett didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him, her blue eyes unusually peaceful, as though the pain had traveled so far through her heart that it had finally become silence. The massive study smelled faintly of leather, cedar, and fresh coffee that had long gone cold. Every polished shelf, every framed photograph, every perfectly arranged document reflected the precision of Ethan's world. It was a world built on discipline, reputation, and absolute control. Claire had helped maintain every piece of it without asking for recognition, but in that moment, none of it seemed to belong to her anymore. She reached into the pocket of her light gray coat and placed a simple silver key on his mahogany desk. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't symbolic to anyone else. It was simply the spare key to the private office she had opened before sunrise almost every morning for over 1,000 days. Beside it, she laid a neatly folded envelope. Ethan never looked at either one. He remained standing near the window with his hands resting behind his back, his expression unreadable, convinced that she would eventually apologize like she always did whenever tension found its way between them. But today was different. Claire offered a faint smile that never reached her eyes. "I understand," she said quietly. Her voice carried no anger, no accusation, only a strange kind of acceptance that Ethan failed to notice. She turned toward the door, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floor that she had personally chosen during the estate's renovation 2 years earlier. Every corner of this house carried invisible traces of her decisions, her patience, and her care. Yet as she walked away, it felt as though she had never existed there at all. Ethan didn't stop her. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't wonder why she left her office phone on the desk or why her schedule book remained perfectly organized beside tomorrow's appointments. In his mind, Claire Bennett would return before dinner, just as she always returned after every disagreement. The front door closed with a gentle click that barely echoed through the mansion. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but something about it felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. Outside, Claire stepped onto the rain-soaked driveway, carrying nothing more than a small overnight bag that could fit beneath an airline seat. She never looked back at the estate rising behind her like a fortress of stone and glass. She simply disappeared into the gray afternoon as another passing cab carried her away from the only life she had known for years. 3 days later, Ethan Romano stood in the same study staring at the untouched envelope still resting on his desk when his chief of security entered with an expression he had never worn before. "Sir," he said carefully, "we've checked every address, every flight record, every hotel reservation, every contact we could think of." Ethan slowly turned toward him. "And?" The room grew impossibly quiet before the answer finally came. "No one can find Claire Bennett. It's as if she decided the entire city would remember her only after she was gone." 3 years earlier, Claire Bennett arrived at the Romano estate carrying one medium suitcase, a folder with employment records, and exactly $42 left in her checking account. The estate stood on the northern edge of Chicago like a world separated from ordinary life, surrounded by towering oak trees, iron gates, and quiet roads where expensive cars came and went without attracting attention. She had not applied because she admired powerful people. She applied because the salary was enough to help her father continue his physical therapy after a construction accident had ended his career. Every dollar mattered, and pride had become a luxury she could no longer afford. The head of household operations studied Claire for a long moment before asking the final question. "Can you work without needing recognition?" Claire smiled politely. "The work matters more than the credit." That answer earned her the position. On her first morning, she learned the rhythm of the estate before sunrise. Coffee had to be ready at exactly 6:15. Financial reports were arranged in precise order. Every meeting began on time because someone behind the scenes quietly made sure nothing ever failed. She memorized names, schedules, allergies, birthdays, travel preferences, and dozens of details that most people overlooked. By the end of her first week, she already knew the estate better than anyone expected. Ethan Romano barely noticed. To him, she was another efficient employee, someone who appeared whenever something needed fixing and disappeared the moment the problem was solved. During meetings, he rarely looked directly at her. He would ask for a document, and it would already be waiting. He would mention a delayed conference call, and somehow the schedule would already be adjusted. He assumed excellence happened naturally because he had never stopped to wonder who created it. Claire never corrected that assumption. She believed dependable work should speak louder than compliments. As the months passed, the invisible responsibilities multiplied. She reminded Ethan to call his mother every Sunday afternoon, even though he believed he never forgot. She quietly replaced a damaged family photograph before anyone noticed. She coordinated charity events without allowing reporters to discover who organized them. She even learned the favorite recipes of longtime employees so birthdays could still feel like celebrations inside a household where business often overshadowed ordinary life. None of those moments appeared on official calendars. None of them generated headlines. Yet they slowly became the quiet foundation beneath Ethan's carefully controlled world. Sometimes, late in the evening, Claire would stand alone in the grand foyer after everyone else had gone home, listening to the grandfather clock echo through the empty halls. She often wondered what kind of man Ethan Romano might have become if he had lived a quieter life, one where success was measured by family dinners instead of endless negotiations. She never expected to know the answer. She only hoped that one day he might notice the people standing beside him before they quietly disappeared. What Claire never realized was that the greatest mistake was not believing Ethan underestimated her. It was believing that he would always have another chance to finally see her. By the beginning of the second year, Claire Bennett had become the quiet heartbeat of the Romano estate, although almost no one realized it. Every successful day seemed effortless because she had already solved tomorrow's problems before anyone else noticed they existed. When a winter storm threatened to cancel an important charity gala, she coordinated alternate transportation before sunrise, allowing every guest to arrive safely without ever learning how close the event had come to failing. When Ethan's mother forgot one of her routine medical appointments, Claire gently rearranged an entire week of meetings so Ethan could accompany her without sacrificing a single business commitment. He later believed the opening in his schedule had appeared by coincidence. Claire never corrected him. She simply smiled and returned to work. The employees trusted her because she listened before giving instructions. The gardeners knew she remembered the names of their children. The kitchen staff appreciated that she always thanked them before leaving each evening. The security team quietly admitted that she noticed unusual details faster than most trained professionals. She remembered license plate numbers after seeing them once, recognized unfamiliar delivery vehicles from half a block away, and questioned invoices that looked perfectly ordinary until someone examined them more carefully. More than once, her attention prevented expensive mistakes, yet every report reached Ethan's desk without her name attached. She believed the solution mattered more than the recognition. Ethan continued living inside the carefully ordered world she protected. Every morning his coffee appeared exactly the way he preferred, neither too hot nor too cool. Every flight departed on schedule. Every important document waited neatly arranged before he requested it. His suits were delivered from the tailor before he realized they needed alterations. His favorite restaurant somehow always found room for unexpected reservations. He accepted these conveniences the same way people accepted sunrise, assuming they simply happened because they always had. Claire watched this pattern with quiet acceptance. She never expected gratitude. Still, there were moments when she wondered whether Ethan actually saw the people surrounding him or only the results they produced. One rainy Thursday evening, she found him alone in the library staring at an old family photograph. The confidence he carried in public had disappeared for only a few seconds. His shoulders looked heavier than usual, and the silence around him felt almost fragile. Claire quietly placed a fresh cup of coffee beside him without saying a word. Ethan glanced at the mug before returning his attention to the photograph. "Thank you," he said absent-mindedly, not looking up. It was the first genuine thank you she had heard from him in months. For reasons she could not explain, those two simple words stayed with her much longer than they should have. They reminded her that beneath the disciplined executive was still a man carrying burdens no schedule could erase. From that evening forward, Claire became even more determined to protect the balance inside the estate, not because it was her responsibility, but because she believed everyone deserved someone quietly standing in their corner. She never imagined that the same loyalty would eventually place her in the center of a misunderstanding that would erase years of trust in a single afternoon. While everyone admired the strength of Ethan Romano's empire, no one noticed the invisible foundation beneath it, and foundations are rarely appreciated until the day they disappear. The beginning of the end arrived on a bright Monday morning that looked far too ordinary to change anyone's life. Spring sunlight poured across the marble floors of the Romano estate while preparations unfolded for the largest business partnership Ethan had negotiated in years. Executives filled the conference rooms, assistants hurried through the hallways, and every minute followed the precise schedule Claire Bennett had organized weeks in advance. By noon, everything was proceeding exactly as planned, until one confidential contract disappeared. At first, no one panicked. Important documents were occasionally misplaced before major meetings, and Claire immediately began checking every office, every printer, and every secure cabinet. She remained calm because she believed there had to be a simple explanation. Then the accusations began. One executive quietly informed Ethan that security footage showed Claire entering the private records room shortly before the file vanished. Another employee claimed she had been seen carrying a sealed envelope only minutes later. The timing looked terrible. Whispered conversations spread through the estate faster than facts. Claire stood silently while suspicious glances followed her from one room to another. She knew exactly what everyone was thinking, yet she also knew she had done nothing wrong. The security director eventually located a copy of the contract inside a storage cabinet rarely used by senior staff. It appeared someone had intentionally hidden it there after removing several important pages. No one could explain how it happened. Unfortunately, appearances often speak louder than truth. Ethan listened as one report followed another, each one sounding more convincing than the last. Every piece of incomplete evidence pointed toward the one person who had unrestricted access to nearly every corner of the estate. Claire watched his expression carefully, hoping he would ask the one question that mattered. She expected him to say, "Tell me your side." Instead, he remained completely silent. The room felt colder than the air conditioning could possibly explain. Claire slowly reached into her folder and removed the notebook where she documented every schedule change and every secure delivery. If Ethan allowed her 5 minutes, she could prove exactly where she had been throughout the morning. She took one small step forward before another executive interrupted. "The meeting starts in 10 minutes. We cannot waste any more time." Ethan glanced at the executives waiting around the conference table. Their impatience hung heavily in the room. Then he looked toward Claire with eyes that revealed neither anger nor compassion, only disappointment. "Leave it," he said quietly. Claire hesitated, believing he meant the notebook. Instead, his next words erased 3 years of quiet loyalty. "You should leave." No explanation followed. No investigation. No opportunity to defend herself. The decision was final because Ethan Romano rarely questioned his own judgment once it had been made. Claire lowered the notebook without opening it. She looked at the familiar faces surrounding the table, people whose birthdays she remembered, whose families she had quietly helped, whose daily lives she had made easier for years. Not one person spoke for her. She nodded once, accepting the weight of a misunderstanding she never created. "I hope," she said softly, "that one day the truth arrives before regret does." With that, she gathered her notebook, walked out of the conference room, and gently closed the door behind her. Inside, the meeting continued exactly on schedule. Outside, the first invisible crack appeared in the foundation that had been holding Ethan Romano's entire world together. Claire Bennett left the Romano estate before sunset carrying the same medium suitcase she had arrived with 3 years earlier. The security guards respectfully opened the front gate, unsure whether to offer sympathy or remain silent. Claire spared them the discomfort by thanking each of them with the same warm smile she had worn every morning. She climbed into a rideshare vehicle, gave the driver the address of a modest apartment on the north side of Chicago, and watched the estate disappear behind rows of spring trees. She never checked whether anyone was watching her leave. Back at the estate, the afternoon meeting ended with polite handshakes and confident predictions about the future. Ethan Romano remained convinced he had protected his organization by making a difficult decision without hesitation. That certainty lasted less than 24 hours. The following morning began with small inconveniences that seemed almost laughable. His calendar contained overlapping appointments. A conference call had been scheduled using the wrong time zone. A client expecting breakfast arrived to discover the reservation had somehow never been confirmed. Ethan frowned, assuming someone else had become careless. By lunchtime, another problem surfaced. His mother's physician called asking why her monthly follow-up visit had been cancelled without explanation. Ethan insisted he had never cancelled it. The physician quietly informed him that the request had come from an administrative email account that no longer existed because Claire had been the only authorized coordinator. For the first time, Ethan realized there were responsibilities no one else even knew existed. Over the next several days, the small cracks multiplied. Vendors called asking questions that no employee could answer. Household staff searched through filing cabinets trying to locate records that Claire had always retrieved within seconds. Charity organizations reached out after discovering annual donations had not yet been processed because no one knew the deadlines she had memorized without writing them down. Even the estate felt strangely unfamiliar. Fresh flowers stopped appearing in the front hall every Monday morning. Ethan's favorite coffee tasted different because no one remembered the exact blend she quietly ordered every month from a small family-owned roaster outside Milwaukee. The library window remained slightly open during an unexpected rainstorm because no one realized Claire always checked every room before leaving each evening. None of these moments threatened the Romano Empire. Yet together they created an absence too large to ignore. Employees who had rarely spoken during meetings now exchanged uncertain glances, waiting for instructions that never came. Ethan found himself asking simple questions followed by uncomfortable silence. Who normally handles this? The answer became increasingly predictable. Claire did. Who arranged that? Claire. Who remembers those details? Claire. Her name echoed through the estate with growing frequency until it seemed woven into every unfinished task. Late one evening, Ethan entered his study intending to prepare for another meeting. Instead, he noticed a small handwritten note tucked beneath the corner of his desk calendar. The handwriting was unmistakable. It simply read, "Do not forget your mother's favorite lilies bloom this week." There was no signature because there had never needed to be one. Ethan stared at the note for a long time before slowly looking around the room. Everything remained exactly where it had always been, yet for the first time since building his carefully controlled world, the silence no longer felt like peace. It felt like the unmistakable sound of someone important no longer being there. 1 week after Claire Bennett walked away from the Romano estate, certainty finally gave way to doubt. Ethan Romano had spent years trusting facts over emotions, schedules over instincts, and results over conversations. Now, for the first time in his career, every answer seemed to create a new question. It began with something almost too ordinary to notice. The security director requested permission to archive footage from the day the contract disappeared. Ethan approved without looking, but as the director gathered the files, he hesitated. "Sir, there is one camera that was under maintenance that morning. The backup recording finished processing overnight." Ethan slowly raised his eyes. "Show me." The video was grainy and silent, capturing only a side hallway outside the records room. Claire appeared exactly where everyone expected her to be, carrying her schedule notebook. Seconds later, another executive entered from the opposite direction holding the same sealed envelope witnesses had claimed belonged to Claire. The executive glanced around, opened the storage cabinet, slipped something inside, and quietly walked away. Claire never returned to that hallway. The room fell completely silent. Ethan replayed the footage once. Then twice. Then a third time. Every confident assumption he had made collapsed without a single word being spoken. "Why was this not included?" he asked. Quietly. The security director swallowed hard. "The backup server malfunction delayed the upload until this morning." Ethan dismissed everyone from the room. Alone in his study, he reached for the notebook Claire had tried to show him before he told her to leave. It had remained exactly where she left it. Inside were detailed notes documenting every delivery, every visitor, every schedule adjustment, each page carefully dated in her precise handwriting. Halfway through the notebook, a folded receipt slipped onto the desk. It was from the small flower shop that delivered fresh lilies to his mother every spring. Claire had paid for the last shipment herself after learning the estate account had temporarily frozen during a banking audit. Another page revealed she had personally covered emergency travel expenses for a longtime groundskeeper whose wife required unexpected surgery, quietly arranging repayment only if he ever felt financially comfortable. Ethan continued turning pages. There were reminders about anniversaries, handwritten instructions for the kitchen staff during holiday meals, and careful notes about his mother's favorite music whenever she felt lonely. None of those responsibilities had ever appeared in Claire's job description. She had simply noticed what other people needed and quietly filled the empty spaces without asking anyone to notice. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes resting on the final page. Written neatly across the bottom was a sentence that seemed intended for no one except herself. "Kindness is only invisible until the day it is gone." The words settled over the room with unbearable weight. For the first time since Claire entered his life 3 years earlier, Ethan understood that he had never truly known the woman who stood beside him every day. He had trusted rumors instead of loyalty, appearances instead of character, and convenience instead of truth. The painful realization was not that Claire had been innocent. The painful realization was that she had given him countless reasons to believe in her, and he had ignored every single one. The following morning, Ethan Romano canceled every meeting on his calendar for the first time in over a decade. His executives assumed a financial emergency had forced the decision, but they quickly realized something far more unusual was happening. Ethan was not searching for a missing contract anymore. He was searching for Claire Bennett. Her apartment had already been rented to another tenant. The elderly landlord smiled kindly when Ethan showed her Claire's photograph. "She moved out the day after she arrived," the woman explained. "She thanked me for the opportunity, paid every dollar she owed, and said she wanted a fresh start somewhere quiet." "Did she leave a forwarding address?" Ethan asked. The woman slowly shook her head. "She only asked me to water the little fern she could not fit into her suitcase." Ethan looked toward the apartment window where the small green plant rested in the afternoon sunlight. Claire had remembered to care for a simple houseplant before thinking about herself. Somehow that detail hurt more than any accusation ever could. Over the next several days, Ethan visited every place he knew had once mattered to her. The neighborhood coffee shop where she occasionally bought cinnamon muffins for the kitchen staff on Friday mornings. The independent bookstore where she always ordered mystery novels for his mother every Christmas. The family-owned flower shop outside Milwaukee that still remembered her by name. Everywhere he went, people spoke about Claire with the same quiet admiration. She always asked how my grandson was doing. She paid for flowers for a stranger who could not afford them. She never left without thanking everyone behind the counter. Ethan listened without interrupting. Every conversation introduced him to another version of Claire that he had never bothered to discover while she stood only a few feet away inside his own home. Back at the estate, employees noticed the change immediately. Ethan no longer rushed through hallways without looking up. He stopped to ask the gardeners whether their families were doing well. He thanked the kitchen staff after dinner. He personally visited his mother carrying a bouquet of fresh lilies instead of asking someone else to deliver them. None of those gestures felt natural. They felt overdue. One evening, the head of security entered the study holding a thin folder. "Sir, we expanded the search beyond Chicago. We checked airline records, train reservations, rental agencies, and employment databases across Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan. There is still no confirmed trace of Miss Bennett." Ethan accepted the folder but never opened it. He quietly looked through the window toward the city lights stretching across the horizon. For years he believed influence could solve every problem if enough resources were applied. Yet no amount of money, reputation, or authority could persuade someone to come back after trust had been broken. He finally understood that Claire had not disappeared because she wanted to be found. She had disappeared because she believed she had never truly mattered. The realization settled over him with unbearable clarity. He had spent years building an empire people admired from a distance, but the one person who had quietly held that empire together had walked away believing she was completely alone, and there was no victory in the world that could make that truth feel any less devastating. Nearly 6 weeks passed before the smallest coincidence changed everything. Ethan Romano had stopped expecting dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, he found himself paying attention to ordinary moments because Claire Bennett had always believed ordinary moments revealed the truth. On a quiet Saturday morning, Ethan visited the small flower shop outside Milwaukee to thank the elderly owner for helping identify one of Claire's handwritten receipts. As they spoke, the owner disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a cardboard box. "She left this behind months ago," the woman said gently. "She bought gardening gloves and forgot this sketchbook. I kept hoping she would come back for it." Ethan carefully opened the worn cover. Inside were simple pencil drawings of gardens, bookstores, old brick houses, and lakeside parks. Between the sketches were handwritten notes describing peaceful places she hoped to visit one day. One page caught his attention immediately. Beneath the drawing of a white lighthouse stood a single sentence. "Someday I want to watch the sunrise over Lake Michigan from Harbor Point and finally feel like I belong somewhere." The flower shop owner smiled softly. "Harbor Point is a tiny town about 3 hours north. She used to ask me about it every spring." Ethan left without another word. The drive north felt longer than any journey he could remember. The highways gradually gave way to quiet roads lined with towering pine trees until the lake finally appeared, stretching endlessly beneath a pale blue afternoon sky. Harbor Point was everything Claire would have loved. Small cafes, independent bookstores, families walking along the waterfront without rushing anywhere. It was the kind of place where people remembered each other's names. Ethan quietly visited every shop carrying the same photograph. Most people politely shook their heads. Then an elderly librarian adjusted her glasses before looking at the picture again. "I know her," she said. "She volunteers here every Wednesday evening reading stories to children. She should be arriving in about an hour." Ethan's heartbeat slowed instead of racing. For weeks he had imagined what he would say if this moment ever came, but every prepared sentence suddenly felt empty. He waited outside beneath a maple tree overlooking the library entrance as the afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh water and blooming flowers through the quiet streets. Exactly 1 hour later, a familiar silver sedan parked across the street. Claire stepped out wearing a simple light blue sweater, comfortable jeans, and canvas shoes. Her hair moved gently in the lake breeze as she smiled at two children running toward the library steps. There was no schedule in her hands. No ringing phone. No endless list of responsibilities waiting to be solved. She looked lighter somehow, as though the weight she had carried for years had finally been lifted. Ethan remained completely still. For the first time since they had met, he understood that this peaceful version of Claire had existed all along beneath the endless demands of his world. She turned toward the entrance without noticing him standing across the street. Ethan took one careful step forward before stopping again. After everything that had happened, he realized something that would have been impossible for the man he used to be. Finding Claire had never guaranteed she would want to see him. This time, the decision belonged entirely to her. Claire Bennett paused with one hand resting on the library door before slowly turning toward the familiar figure standing beneath the maple tree. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sun reflected across Lake Michigan, painting the quiet streets of Harbor Point with a warm golden light that felt completely different from the polished marble halls they once shared. Ethan Romano looked older than she remembered, not because of time, but because regret had softened the certainty that had always surrounded him. He took a careful step forward, stopping several feet away as though afraid that coming any closer might disturb the peaceful life she had finally built. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Not an explanation. Not an excuse. An apology." Claire studied his face for several long seconds. It was the first time she had ever seen him without the invisible armor of confidence that had once defined every decision he made. "You found the truth," she answered gently. Ethan lowered his eyes. Too late. A small breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers from nearby gardens. Children's laughter drifted from inside the library, reminding both of them that life had continued even while they remained trapped inside the memories of one painful afternoon. "I believed people instead of believing you," Ethan admitted. "I judged years of loyalty in less than a minute. I cannot change what I did, but I needed you to hear me say that I was wrong." Claire remained silent. She had imagined this conversation many times during the first lonely weeks after leaving Chicago. In those early days, she thought hearing those words would erase every wound. Instead, she realized healing had quietly happened long before Ethan arrived. Harbor Point had given her something no mansion ever could. It had given her peace. "Do you know why I never argued that day?" she finally asked. Ethan slowly shook his head. "Because trust cannot be proven by speaking louder. If someone truly knows your character, they should not need a defense." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Every word landed with quiet honesty instead of anger, making them impossible to ignore. "I failed you," he whispered. Claire nodded once. "Yes, you did." The simple acknowledgement hung between them without bitterness. It was only the truth. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed the silver office key she had left behind. "This belongs to you," he said. Claire smiled softly before gently pushing his hand back toward him. "No," she replied. "It belongs to the woman I used to be. I am not returning to that life." Ethan looked at the key resting in his palm before slowly closing his fingers around it. For the first time, he understood that forgiveness and returning were not the same thing. Claire had forgiven him, but she had also chosen herself. She had built a future where her kindness was appreciated instead of expected, where her value did not depend on how invisible she could become. They walked together toward the lakeshore in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Claire stopped. "I truly hope you become the man you were always capable of being," she said. "Not because you lost me, but because the people still beside you deserve that version of you." Ethan nodded, unable to answer immediately. As Claire turned back toward the library, she did not look behind her, not because she carried resentment, but because she no longer needed to. Ethan remained standing by the water until the evening sun disappeared below the horizon, holding the small silver key that had once opened the door to his office but now unlocked something far more important inside himself. And that day, Ethan Romano finally understood that the greatest measure of strength was never the ability to command loyalty, but the humility to recognize the quiet hearts that had been faithfully standing beside him all along.